this is an opportunity to be allowing and to not have to put everything together, not have to make things happen, and not be in control. And it took a good long time.
The reason that we are having such a good time with you is because we want to put forth the idea that deliberately doing nothing is doing something. And that it is the smartest thing that you could ever do, because in deliberately doing nothing, you are deliberately reaching for the state of allowing, which allows everything that you've ever wanted to come into place. In other words, when you realize that in everything that you've been living, you've been asking. And so Source, who adores you and hears you and understands you and is answering you, is responding in the steady, consistent way that it is, that when you decide finally, and usually you have to beat yourself up pretty good before you come to that place, but when you finally decide that you are going to afford yourself a block of time where you do not push yourself to do something that you do not want to do, or where you do not force yourself to do something when you would rather not do it, but instead you choose what feels best to you, then all kinds of things come into place. And we were also teasing with you a little bit because we know that when you make the decision to do nothing and you get into that place of allowing, that then all kinds of inspiration to do things comes forth, because it isn't about doing nothing, it's about feeling better about what you are doing. Yes.
Exactly, yes. My point is that after that year, and I had no plan. I didn't even say I'm going to be gone for a year and come back. I said I'm going, and I went, and then the money I had got all spent delightfully, and I came back, and I had loved that life of independence and doing nothing or doing what I chose to do, and then I didn't have any money more in the bank right then, and so all I could think of to do was go back to work. And I was listening to your CDs about the stove, and if there's a hot stove, you don't want to go and touch the stove. And I'm thinking, I have to go sit on this stove. And I said, I didn't know what else to do. And I thought, well, you could just decide you're not going to work and just keep sitting on the beach. And I didn't have, what is the word, the courage or the ability to do that. And so I went back to work, and I had a terrible job, and I had a mediocre job, and now I find myself in an excellent job that I'm grateful to have. But I really liked the independence, and so I had to come back and sit on this hot stove. And so I thought, okay, I have all these tools, I know how to do it, I spent weeks getting to where I would feel good. But I'm back in a similar, not the same hole, but now I'm back at work doing somebody else's work.
Well, one of the reasons that we wanted to play with you as we did about doing nothing is because we've noticed that as we pan the human scope, that there is more joyful experience in the deliberate doing of something than in the indeliberate doing of something. And there's actually more joy in the deliberate doing of something than in the deliberate not doing of something. And what we mean by that is when you deliberately focus and energy flows through you and you feel in control of what you're doing, that is like the optimum experience, whether you are physically focused or not. You've sort of set yourself up for not liking working, and you're sort of continuing the story and we were trying to sort of set you off from that a little bit as you speak, and a lot of people do, that work is not a good thing and that leisure time is. And what we like to say is that there are things that you can focus upon that feel good and things that you focus upon that don't feel good, and the environment in which you are doing it is sort of a non-issue. In other words, there are people in what anyone would call a work environment that are on fire with the joy of their work because they're focused with no resistance. But there's something about deciding that you're in bondage or deciding that you're not free and then applying yourself that keeps it from ever being a very good feeling experience, because you already have a vibrational drum that you're beating that says, I'm really not free and I'm having to do something I don't want to do. So to sort of soften that up a little bit, we want to tell you a story. We were visiting with someone recently, and this was a person who was not complaining about what she didn't want to do. Instead, she was complaining that there were so many things she wanted to do, she couldn't get to them all. And we thought, this is really an interesting thing. She said, I'm joyful doing this, but there are all these other things I want to do too, and I'm perplexed because life is so beautiful and there are so many lovely things to do and I can't get to all of them. And we played with her. We thought it was quite funny because we wanted to say, if what you're doing is bringing you joy, then what possible difference could it be whether you're doing this to get your joy or this to get your joy or this to get your joy or this to get your joy? If what you're doing is giving you joy, that's sort of like we said to her, going to a buffet and finding something delicious to eat and then complaining that you're not eating that and you're not eating that and you're not eating that. It makes little difference if you're getting fuel and satisfaction and nourishment from it. And so we would like to use that as a sort of a bridge to say to you that you can be joyful in anything that you are doing, but you have to stop saying, I don't have choices, when in fact you do. You said to us, I had the choice of working or not working. Now, what you really meant was, well, I really didn't have the choice because if I don't go to work, I don't have any money. And if I don't have any money, then there are all kinds of other choices that I've made that can't be satisfied. Right. But really, there are a lot of people that are on the beach today that don't have any money. In other words, that is an option. And there are a lot of people on the beach today who have plenty of money. In other words, you just have to decide what you most want to do. But what you more than anything have to do is stop deciding more what you don't want. In other words, you have to start saying what you do want. Esther noticed, and she said to Jerry, this cruise that they took, on Tuesday, it was a Saturday to Saturday cruise. And they worked quite diligently to get all of their work done that they would have done during the week they were on the cruise, done before they were on the cruise. And so they had been pretty steady after their projects. And there was a sort of feeling of relaxation that first day, like, phew, we made it, we got it all done, and here we are. But on about Tuesday, Esther is looking at the calendar and thinking, Tuesday, I'm going to go out of my mind by Saturday. Because while there were beautiful things to see, it was a far different pace than she was accustomed to. And then she relaxed and took a deep breath and decided to give herself completely to the cruise. She decided to enjoy the people that were around her. She decided to enjoy the process of the cruise itself. She decided to pay attention to where she was and to really listen to what the moderator was saying as she was hearing different things. And within a few hours, she had so completely relaxed into the cruise that she said to Jerry, on Saturday, let's just get off and get back on. In other words, isn't it possible that you could just keep cruising?
People do.
Isn't it possible that you could just never get off the boat? In other words, just continue to go from one lovely place to another? Now, what we would like to say to all of you about this is that that really is the way your life is supposed to be. It's what you had in mind when you came forth to come into these bodies. You knew that this was an environment that had the potential to surprise and delight you in endless ways. You never said, I'll go forth and pay a price. And once I've paid a big enough price, I will allow myself a little bit of pleasure in return for the hardship. Because from your non-physical perspective, you understand that that is not the way it works. In other words, we would like all of you to assume the identity of one who is on an endless cruise, or one who is on an endless beach, or one who is on an endless path of beaches and cruises and interesting things and interesting people and interesting subjects and wonderful, adventurous, delicious, wonderful things to do. In other words, we would like you to adopt that as your identity. And it takes some living of the other to spike that desire enough that you begin to do that, but there is no reason for you to have less than one joyful moment after one joyful moment after one joyful moment. You do not have to dip back in to the unwanted. So what is in the vibrational makeup of you or of anyone that makes you think that? In other words, where do you pick up this I have to pay a price sort of thing? I have to work for many years before I get to retire, and then we see those in retirement in absolute boredom or sort of it's sort of a limp sort of feeling because they are accustomed to having energy drawn through them. So what we would like you to realize is that to have energy drawn through you that you are not in alignment with is an unpleasant experience. To want things that you don't believe you can have or achieve is an uncomfortable experience. To not have any desire flowing through you is also an uncomfortable experience. So you went from an extreme of not feeling free and not really feeling very fulfilled and not feeling really very satisfied. Really, we would say, of not having a desire that was really summoning purely through you by your own intent. You went from that into an experience of non-activity, and we do not disagree with you. We think that a time of doing nothing or not being required to do something would feel more satisfying than a time of having to do a lot of things that you don't want to do. We can feel, as we were talking earlier about the path of least resistance, how anger is a relief from depression. It's not the whole answer, but it is a relief. So we can understand how lying on the beach or saying I have nothing to do would feel like a marked improvement over having to do something you don't want to do, especially for someone who does not seem to be appreciating the efforts that you are making. But we have to say to you that if you can get focused in an attitude of non-resistance, that almost anything that you might choose to do would in the long run feel better than choosing nothing, because you are a focusing mechanism. It's the hardest thing that physical friends hear from us. The most difficult thing that they hear from us is that you really do want to be an active participator in this life experience. You really do want to have reason to focus and reason to decide. You really do want hands-on creative control of your life experience. And we think that the story that you told us is not about wanting to do nothing. We think the story that you told us is about wanting less resistance in your life.
Yes,
we think that the story that you told us is about having more individual say in where you get to turn your attention.
Exactly.
We don't think it's about doing or not doing. We think it's about the feeling of bondage or the feeling of freedom.
Right.
And so what we're wanting to say to you is that you can achieve that feeling of freedom even in a work environment, because while there could be requirements about when you are there, and there could be requirements about how much time you spend there, and there could be requirements as you make these agreements with your employer about what you do while you are there, no one can control what you think, and no one can control how you feel. Therefore, no one can control your point of attraction. And so you might look at it. Esther looked around this ship. Now, as she got back in the monster bus and started romping freely, she said, I really like driving the monster bus. And Jerry said, you probably would have liked driving the ship too. In other words, Esther likes the feeling of getting to choose where she's going. And for a little while, as big as that ship was, it felt a little limited to Esther, because there were only so many floors and there was only so much circumference and there were only so many places she could go. And while she had great visual, she did not feel the control that she's accustomed to feeling. But she discovered that she could find herself feeling as good or as not good. She had as much freedom to feel as she has ever had in any place that she's ever been. You just have to decide that you're in charge of the way you feel, that you're in charge of the thoughts that you offer, that you're in charge of the vibration that is you, and then you begin to be in charge of what comes to you. Esther said to Jerry, it's interesting to be with so many people who have no idea of what we teach. It's interesting to be with so many people who have no idea that they are the deliberate creator of their experience. And then they sat for a meal, and they were seated with two other people who they did not know, who immediately began asking the questions that Abraham is expressing all of the time. And Esther sat there sort of filled with goosebumps as this woman talked about her dearly departed father, and how she said, as she sat down, she said, I don't know why I'm telling this to you, and I've never told this to anyone, but I feel like you have a message for me. And Jerry and Esther didn't respond, because at that point they had no idea what the message might be. And then she told the story of her father, who had made his transition. And as she was watching them take his body from the apartment house in which they were living and carrying it down the long hall and off, she stood there and she thought, so that's it? So that's it? So that's it? And Esther said, I'm compelled to tell you that that's far from it. That's far from it. There is no ending to that which we all are.